A few weeks ago, I tried to terminate this cover crop 4 different ways. Some ways didn't work at all, and some ways appear to be working pretty well. Today, you're gonna find out what worked and what didn't work, so you can just skip to what works when you do this at home. Let's get into it and see those results right now. Thanks for watching the video today. I'm Diego, D-I-E-G-O, and today we're talking terminating sorghum Sudan grass. It's great to grow cover crops, they help the soil, but how do you stop growing them when you actually want to grow something else? It can be very tricky, especially for vigorous cover crops like sorghum Sudan grass. What you see right here is a control. This is an area where I just simply trimmed it and it's growing back. Now let's look at the ways I tried to terminate this exact crop a little further that way. Moving from our control to our first test plot, this is crimped sorghum Sudan grass. And as you can see, I don't think it worked really well at all. I tried stomping it over with my foot. I tried bending the stems and really hearing them crack and break with my hand. All of the individual plants have grown back. None have really grown back from the part that was crimped, but where you're seeing a lot of regrowth is at the base. They're sending up new shoots. So I'm thinking that even if you're crimping the stalks, you might stop regrowth from those exact stalks, but you're not going to stop the plant from regrowing because it's just going to send out new shoots below it. This is a method I had high hopes for. I really was hoping that this method would work because it's relatively easy. You could use a lawn roller, a board, your feet, something like that to just break it, bend it over in place and leave the mulch on surface. But if you did want to have to terminate a cover crop, this is clearly not the way to do it with sorghum Sudan grass. If you were trying this and you needed to plant something else in the bed, you'd be kind of screwed right now because this is still growing and you're gonna have to get it out of here. Bed number 2, the sorghum Sudan grass in this bed was cut off above surface using a sickle and then tarped. At first glance, it looks like it might have worked until you look at the edges. We got some of the sorghum, it's getting a little froggy, it's squeezing out of the edges. So let's pull the tarp back and see what's underneath here. So after pulling the tarp, what do we have left? We have a bunch of plants that have regrown in the absence of light. They're very pale. I have a feeling if you left this tarp on here longer, these inner plants would die. The ones at the edges did shoot horizontally sideways to try and go around the edge of the tarp, which I think is just kind of interesting and cool in its own way. Those are very green because they were able to get out and get to the light. But the ones in the center, they're living but faded. I have a feeling if you left the tarp on longer, they would end up dying. The tarp was on for about 3 weeks. Fairly hot weather in all of this. So did it work? Not really, no. Thoughts on using tarps like this in general? Well, I have mixed feelings about them. They are effective, they do work, but they take time to work. They're not really instant kills, like cutting it off like an herbicide would be. Not that I'm condoning use of an herbicide, but those work pretty fast relative to tarps. The downside of tarps is you have to store them somewhere, you have to pull them out, they don't look the best, they take a long time to cover up the soil surface, you can't plant into that bed immediately, it's just another step. So like all things in life, if you don't have to do it, you don't want to use it. Why buy it, store it, use it, take up all that time if you don't need it? So let's try and find methods that don't involve tarps, which takes us to test bed number 3. In test bed number 3, all the sorghum Sudan grass was cut off with the same Japanese sickle, but the only difference was, versus bed number 2, was we cut it off below surface. So I went below the soil surface to do all of my cutting versus cutting above surface. The goal here was to try and remove any sort of stem biology to limit regrowth. And if you look at this bed, it actually worked really well. This plant completely gone, this plant completely gone, this one completely gone. This one has a few little bits of regrowth, but nothing we couldn't manage with a simple recut. And this is probably our best regrower here. And it's pretty weak overall. So I really like this method. It's a little more intense because you can't just whack off above soil surface. You couldn't use something like a hedge trimmer to do this. You would have to use a knife and you would have to go below soil surface to do the cutting. And if you did do that, it worked pretty well, no tarp. In the cut under surface method, we're going to gather up the plant and we're going to cut underneath this whole core. We're going to remove this stem root connection as deep as possible. Normally this would be pretty easy. My only concern is I have drip line buried in this bed. If I didn't have this drip line, this would be really easy, so I do have to be careful where this drip line is. But once I know where it is, I can get underneath the plant and cut it out. So the below the surface cut, it worked really well. Not much regrowth at all. Any regrowth I would consider very manageable. I really like this method because we were able to cut off all the biomass, use it someplace else, terminate the cover crop, which was the goal. And we didn't have to use the tarp. So far, of all the methods that we've tested, this is the winner. But if you did have problems with this method, there's still one other method that I tried. It was the same thing, only we cut and then we covered it in a tarp. Let's take a look at that. Knowing what I know from bed number 3, I'm gonna assume that this is free and clear of any regrowth. Let's pull the tarp and see what we got. Pulling back the tarp, bed number 4, perfectly clean, 0% regrowth. So this method definitely worked. Knowing this, what I would do is start with the cut under surface method. If that's not working, then cover it with a tarp. I would start there because obviously you don't need the tarp and it's less work. So start with that, see how it works, amend your cutting, deeper cut before you absolutely have to go to this method of cutting and tarping. The great thing about the cut below surface method, knowing that it works, is we could cut out that sorghum Sudan grass and essentially plant right into the bed. You couldn't do that with another method that involves something like a tarp, or even with this crimping where you're going to get potential or probable regrowth. So at the end of the day, I'm going to recommend the Dave Coulier method. And if you're born in the wrong decade, that simply means cut it out. Thanks for watching this video. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.